Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I rise to add my voice to this debate, which, to my mind, is as much a debate on self-determination, self-esteem, self-governance, as it is a debate on transforming our government system, our current form of governance, to a republic. Mr. President, there are those among us who will have you believe that self-rule, self-determination are new phenomena, or that we have rushed into this process to satisfy some unknown or some hidden agenda. There are those amongst us who would have us believe that even after 55 years of independence, that Barbados is not yet ready to fully take the reins of leadership in the affairs of this country, Mr. President. And we must always be somehow be dependent on some distant nation or some distant ruler to act as a superior or overlord in assisting us in navigating our way through what is the 21st century. But we'll have you know, Mr. President, that Barbadians and Barbados we have been demanding self-rule almost from as far back as the 17th century, Mr. President. I believe the year was 1675, and Barbados was not even 50 years old as a colony. But the island had already established itself as one of the leading producers of sugar in the region. And Mr. President, in order to produce that sugar on those massive plantations, the slave masters of the time, the colonial power at the time, had to import large numbers of enslaved Africans from Africa, from the west coast of Africa, to man and to work those fields. They brought them here with the intention of working them to death on these plantations to produce the sugar that we were known for. What these slave masters, I think what they were unaware of at the time was that many of those persons that they enslaved and they brought here, they captured and they brought here and enslaved, were not only known in the countries of origin as for their physical prowess, but some of them were from fairly advanced political systems that with a strata, a hierarchy, and a system that was quite similar to what would have existed in Europe at the time. So it came as no surprise that these persons who would have functioned in some in high capacity, because at points they pulled from all aspects of society. These persons grew tired of the hardship. These persons grew tired of the indignity that characterized slavery here in Barbados, here in the region at the time. And what they did, Mr. President, was that they orchestrated a rebellion. They orchestrated an attack, a plot to overthrow the slave master. But not only overthrow the slave masters, Mr. President, they also plotted to create a system of government that, to quote the words of a historian, they attempted to establish a black system of government that was rooted in the political consciousness and culture of the Akan people of Ghana. But further to that, and perhaps more importantly, Mr. President, they sought to select from amongst themselves. These are black Africans. Sought to select from amongst themselves a person, an elder, that would ascend to the throne of this newly emancipated Barbados, an African king. These persons sought to nominate and sought to put in place. I believe they even created a ceremonial stool that would act as a throne for the newly elected king. Mr. President, it speaks to self-determination at a very early stage in this country's development. And the annals of history would record that the story of Kofi, who was the selected slave or enslaved person, King Kofi as he was called, and the 1675 plan, freedom plan, that he would have orchestrated, was perhaps the first comprehensive revolutionary plan to topple a colonial regime and to replace it with a black African government. This is in 1675, and this is how persons here in Barbados were thinking. According to Harry Beckles, it was the first and most politically sophisticated counter-slavery strategy in the Americas. These people, Mr. President, were ahead of their time. And we will have people believe that self-rule and self-governance is something new to this country. And we've had other acts of insurrection, other acts of revolt, where persons felt that they no longer had to take commands from Europe, from England, from the monarchy. And they sought to put systems in place. And I can speak also to the 1816 rebellion by Bussa, the Right Excellent, where, and I use these two examples because they didn't only rebel. If they had only rebelled with no plan, I would not draw on them to strengthen my argument. But in this case, they did not only rebel and did not only seek to overthrow the government, but they also created a flag, which is a symbol of nationhood. They wanted to create a nation ruled by a black person, ruled by one of them, a person that they could identify with. And I believe that flag is still hung, or it can be found in the British Museum. So persons can go and they can see the flag that was created by Bussa, that would, had it been successful, would have represented a free Barbadian nation. And let us fast forward into the 19th century, into 20th century, into the 1940s, where we would have seen a greater movement for self-governance. We saw the Bush experiment, where elected MPs became members of the executive committee. I believe it was Sir Grantley Adams who would have spoken about the lack of power that these members would have had in Parliament, who would have agitated for a greater say in the running of the country. And even as I look here, I see the word experiment as it refers to the term Bush experiment. On looking back, I would describe it as almost as an insult to the memory of a giant like Sir Grantley Adams, to refer to allowing these persons greater responsibility, a greater say in the running of this country's affairs as just being an experiment. When these people were more than capable, any governor or any person nominated to the executive committee, who in some cases probably might have just been owner of property or such like, but these persons were educated, well suited to run the affairs of this country, but yet were referred to as an experiment. And that, in reflection, I believe, was an insult. It still remains an insult to the memory of the great man. But what it did, Mr. President, it started the gradual process of moving away from the monarchy, moving away from the colonial system into something that resembles more of self-governance, self-rule. We saw in 1954 where the whole concept of ministerial portfolio, which to my research says that was the most advanced system in the English-speaking Caribbean at the time, 1954, that was just a quasi-system of ministerial portfolio. And that moved on to 1958, where you saw a system very similar to what we now see. Of course, in that period, we would have had the universal adult suffrage, where persons for the first time were able to vote, and black people were able to vote and select who they want. And there was that time too also that black people took control of Parliament. So we saw these little changes that moving towards self-determination, self-governance, and self-rules. It didn't just start in July the 27th. It didn't start last year when it was mentioned. This thing started a long time ago, and we were taking baby steps all along, to get us to this point where we are today, Mr. President. So when I hear people talk about it being rushed, or I hear persons saying that we are not ready yet, it causes me to cringe, because if we're not ready now after 55 years, when will we be ready? I'm sure that in another 55 years, there will still be persons saying that we're not ready yet. And let me just move away from the governance and just look really at how we have been as a people, how we have advanced as a people. And I think one of the other ways that we have shown evidence of self-rule, self-determination is in the indigenization of many of our institutions here in Barbados and the Caribbean. As a person in education now, Carpenter always talk about this trade. I can draw on the introduction of the CXC, when we would have shifted away from the British system and introduced the CXC examination. Now, I was not around in the 1970s and 1972 when this occurred, but I'm sure that there were persons at the time saying that we were not ready to manage our own examination body. There were persons, I'm sure, who were saying that Barbados lacked the necessary skill set and the human capital to undertake such a endeavor. I'm sure that the persons who were concerned that our qualifications, our certificates would not be recognized outside of Barbados or maybe outside the Caribbean. I'm sure that the persons who felt that our people would be disadvantaged because we had an indigenous examination body as opposed to the UK one that we were more familiar with and more comfortable with at the time. I'm sure. And I was not there, but I know the nature of people, of man. And there will always be persons who will be scared and uncomfortable to take charge of their own affairs. There will always be people like that. But 50 years later, almost 50 years later, we've seen that CSEC, that it has served us well over the years, and our qualifications are just as relevant as any others in any part of the world, Mr. President. And I'm glad that despite all the criticism all through the 80s and what have you, that they continued to evolve. And in 1999 also, I think it was, they introduced the KIT, you know. The Advanced Proficiency Examination. Of course, there was some pushback. I don't want to call the one school in particular that was very much against it, but there was some pushback. But that's naturally these things. You know, they all embrace KIT, they all embrace the set. And that is us, that is indigenous to the Barbados, indigenous to the region. We no longer have to look to Britain for their system of examining. But these are just two examples, Mr. President, of our movement towards self-determination and self-governance. And there are many more. There are many more examples, especially as it relates to the indigenization of our system. It's something that should be encouraged. There are other things that we should probably indigenize, and I'm sure as we move forward as a republic, we would look to do so. But those are good examples. And we have seen, especially in the 90s under Prime Minister Arthur, we really embrace our cultural heritage, we really embrace our cultural identity, and he would have put a number of measures in place to ensure that we appreciate those who have struggled, to ensure that we enjoy the life that we now enjoy. We would have celebrated our national heroes, we would have changed the name from Trafalgar Square, in 1999. So I think it was, we did all these things because we felt that we should be moving away from the monarchy. We should celebrate our national heroes, and then in our national hero square there should be someone who we as Barbadians would perceive as a national hero. That's why I was happy to be present last year. Or was it the year before? When we removed Nelson last year. When we removed Nelson. Because he had no place now in our national hero square. And removing Nelson, persons felt like he should stay there. But the reality is that it's not really Nelson, the statue, though. If it was just Nelson, the statue, it would have been no problem. It's what Nelson symbolized. What was the thought process in 1813 when it was erected? What was the thinking at the time? That was what we were also removing. And this year, in 2021, we will remove the Queen as our head of state, Mr. President. No longer will our ministers, our parliamentary secretaries swear allegiance to the Queen, nor her heirs and successors. And I'm also glad that we also went about introducing new national honors that were separate and distinct from the imperial honors that we would have conferred on our people before. I'm thinking of the Order of Freedom of Barbados, these indigenous honors, celebrating who we are, who we want to be, who we see ourselves as. all examples of a country coming of age, all examples of a country moving forward, Mr. President. As I conclude, I want to say that over the past 300 plus years, almost 400 years, we have developed from a colony to an independent nation that has stood proudly in the world. I can say, like I've heard earlier in this space, we have punched above our weight. We have established ourselves and we have pretty much evolved into a mature democracy. But we cannot move to the next level, the next step, unless we can have a conversation as to who the head of state in our country will be. And we cannot move to the next level, we cannot evolve unless we first address this notion of head of state. In fact, Mr. President, I believe it was Mr. Woodrow Wilson. He was the 28th president of the USA, of the United States. And he said, and I quote, "Self-determination is not a mere phase. It is an imperative principle of action, which statesmen will henceforth ignore at their own peril." It is an imperative. So after 55 years, Mr. President, of being independent and still being under the British monarchy, I think that it is imperative that we take that next step towards freedom, where it can be that a small child, boy or girl born in this country can aspire to the highest office in our land and who can make decisions on our behalf. Symbolically, this is important because it will say to the world that we are now truly a fully independent country and no longer will we have a foreign monarch as the head of state. So with that, Mr. President, I want to fully support this bill. I think, like as has been said before, it's a few decades late. We should have been here a long time ago, but we're here now. And I want to fully associate myself with the words of all my colleagues who support this bill, who have spoken before. I want to give this bill as I said, my full support. With that, Mr. President, I'm obliged to you.
Thank you, Senator Dr. Springer. Senator Hunt.
Thank you, sir. October is my favorite month of the year. Coincidentally, it was in October last year that I became the last member of the Senate of Barbados who would swear, I don't swear in this context, but who would affirm his allegiance to Her Majesty the Queen, her heirs and successors, in order to be able to serve my country in this chamber. Now, I have always admired Charles Dickens' use of paradox in A Tale of Two Cities, which he began with the words, "It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief, it was the epoch of incredulity." And so, being the last person in the Senate of Barbados so affirmed, I approach today's debate eager to participate, but at the same time concerned about some of the aspects and the manner in which we have gotten to where we are. The issue of a change to republic status is not new. It wasn't sprung on us. I remember being in my early 20s when the Ford Commission report came out. That report was, in my opinion, of high quality. It has withstood the fluxion of time and, in my opinion, is still of high quality. So it was no surprise to me when I learned that a mechanism that we were told recently about, that being the Republican Status Transition Advisory Committee, that was set up to help manage the process by which Barbados becomes a republic, that it would be guided by that report. By way of press release, we were notified that an interim report from this committee was to be submitted by the 30th of June this year, with a final report from this committee being submitted by the end of September this year. I do not know of any such reports being submitted. It may have been done, but I am not aware of that being done. And so, sir, on the issue of Barbados' transition to Republican status, there's been a lot of noise, or noises. And noise is not necessarily something bad. Sometimes noise is a distraction, but sometimes noise is the evidence of people working together as craftsmen, creating something useful. Recently, it was said that there was no wide public consultation, as we now know consultation to be, when now Right Excellent Earl Walton Barrow was intent on us becoming independent. Now, I wouldn't know, I wasn't around then. But I grew up hearing that he took us from being a collection of villages to nationhood. That may have been the reality of that time. But the Barbados today is not as Barbados was 60 years ago. The level and pace of development has transformed what was once a collection of villages to a globally respected nation that holds prominent positions on the world stage. So what is different about Barbados now when we compare it to Barbados, pre-independence Barbados? We can boast of having a campus of the University of the West Indies. And at this point, I would like to make you aware, sir, that the Times Higher Education ranking system, which is the most reputable and independently qualified quality assurance ranking system, has recently determined that from a global field of some 30,000 universities and elite research entities, the UWI now stands in the top 1.5%. And we have a campus of the UWI in Barbados. We have citizens, plenty of whom has passed through the same campus of the University of the West Indies and have gone on to establish a high-quality Barbadian diaspora. We have citizens working in leading positions in various forms of research all over the world. Barbados has had a distinguished record of holding leadership positions at the International Labour Organization, both on the workers' side and on the employer side, where Barbadians have, over time, since independence, held positions on the governing body of the International Labour Organization. And now, we have leadership of UNCTAD, the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. I thought there would be applause for that, sir. But we are said to be a nation that punches above its weight. My brother, Senator Springer, even said so just now in his contribution. So that the citizens and residents of Barbados who make up that formidable spirit that is Barbados, to my mind, deserve to be treated better than how they're being treated in this arrangement for how we embrace our future as a republic. We have proven that we deserve to have that opportunity. And to be frank, we were told that we would have that opportunity in a particular form, and we believed it. The concept of cognitive dissonance comes to mind when I think of that. What does that mean? Cognitive dissonance is an uncomfortable feeling. When I was doing my psychology degree at the same careful campus of the UWI, I was taught that it's a negative emotional state that a person would feel when there are conflicting cognitions or a conflict between a cognition and an experience. So that if a person was of the view, if a person rather was of the knowledge that smoking is not good, it kills, but yet they smoke, they should feel something negative. If they have a conscience, it should prick them. They should feel bad. Now, when persons are faced with cognitive dissonance, they either adjust their behavior to be in conformance with what they believe to be the right course of action, the right thing to do, or they find some rationalization to be able to go ahead and do that which they know better than to do. Doing that repeatedly has the potential to create a callous personality, not a caring personality. More was expected as far as public engagement goes by the time we got to this point. When the government, and this was a good thing they did, when the government decided to address the issue of petroleum-based single-use plastic bags, there was a good campaign that was run. The average person can tell you a lot about petroleum-based single-use plastic bags, why they're not good for the environment. That same person cannot tell you as much about the Constitution, about what is important about us becoming a republic, and becoming a republic with the right frame of mind. And that is disappointing. But in response to some early protests, some noise about it, some noise that was expressing disappointment, there's disappointment about the departure from the type of participation that Barbadians believed they were promised. We received an edict which informed that Barbados will become a republic on November 30th, 2021. And that the effort to settle the Constitution, that will be the Constitution of Republic Barbados, will get into high gear from December 1st, 2021. Now, some people, some even in this chamber, believe that that is putting the carrot in front of the donkey. And I have explored that perspective. But you know, there's precedent for this, for taking that type of approach. So in a sense, it isn't really that odd. The country that we know and which a lot of us love, known as the United States of America, was also once a colony of Britain. Now, they used less diplomatic means than what Barbados used to sever that connection to the metropole. We went to England to negotiate, but centuries before, America went to war. Right? And after winning what is called the War of Independence, which was fought from the mid-1770s to the early 1780s, the Americans then went about the work of settling their constitution. And in respect of that same constitution, at the end of the constitutional conference, that constitution was not signed by 3 delegates that attended that convention. So there was not full agreement on the content. The Constitution was signed in September 1787, ratified in 1788, and came into force in 1789. But, as we heard earlier, actually put by one of our senators, I believe it was Senator Cummings, we do not need external validation for the decisions that we make about ourselves. Certainly not with respect to this matter. Mr. President, I also heard a question raised about whether Parliament could effect this change. And it was a question raised in consideration of the Barbados Independence Order. I think it had the making of one of those clever essay questions about parliamentary sovereignty. It was in the 18th century that Jean-Louis Delorme, a Genevan political writer who got himself exiled from his home country to England because he dared to describe the politics of his country as being an aristocratic state masquerading as a republic. He said of parliamentary sovereignty that the only thing that Parliament cannot do is to make a man a woman and make a woman a man. This was his thinking in the 18th century. But of course, sir, given the experience of other democracies, given pressures which may even be at play in our own reality, more than we are comfortable admitting at this point in time, It has been seen that parliaments can indeed permit, through legislation, a person initially assigned the sex male to be reassigned the sex female, and vice versa. So that blows the lid off of Delorme's theory, his understanding of in the 18th century. So, on the question of whether the Parliament of Barbados can do some legislative severing of a theoretical umbilical cord 6,000 miles or so away in England, of course we can. Yeah? And I believe we should, as a necessary next step on our path of self-determination. Bearing in mind that one of the first defining mantras of a politically independent Barbados was that we will be satellites of no one. I'm of the view that Clause 4.1 of the bill we are considering today addresses that adequately. And I hope that some persons who are listening to our deliberations today, for them that settles that particular question for them. Now, unfortunately, in response to the noise that was made expressing the dissatisfaction of some about the process by which we've gotten to today's moment, expressing the dissatisfaction at there having not been a wide net cast that allowed the level of involvement that Barbadians have come to expect in a nation-building process. We have had some persons who, over time, have put themselves out there and who have been given respect as experts in social matters and political matters, even on diplomatic matters. And they've recently started to say, well, there's no need for all this noise, you could quiet down. This really is just about a change of words. Where you see references to the Queen, we'll change that to be references to the state. Where you see references to the Governor General, we'll change it to be a reference to the President. This is about more than just a change in words. Words are important. Words matter. Words matter because, well, to borrow the sentiments of the late William Raspberry, a Pulitzer Prize-winning writer in the Washington Post, words matter because they may reflect reality, but they also have the power to change reality. This is a moment about which Barbadians should be excited and involved. I think that's an opportunity lost. So, my concerns as we take a step into the Republic of Barbados, unlike the United States of America, there was no war of independence, which served as a major catalyst for what we are doing. But that does not mean that there are not wars going on for the average Barbadian. There are wars going on up there. And I hope that in Republic Barbados, we can do something to quell or otherwise adequately address the causes of these wars, such as the wars fought by fathers in this country in court to have reasonable access to their own children and fair terms on other related matters, so that the war that is fought by too many men against a strong misandrist current. I hope we're able to do something about that in Republic Barbados. Or the war fought by trade unions for recognition. Because although Barbados has ratified certain fundamental ILO conventions which deal with freedom of association, the right to bargain collectively, there is still too much fighting going on about what should be the simple matter of when a trade union becomes recognized as an accredited bargaining agent. And I say that with the understanding that once we take a modern approach to that issue, there will have to be consideration given also to all aspects of the management of trade union recognition, trade union certification, such as trade union decertification. Competition is good. The fittest will survive. And in recent discourse about the issue of vaccination among the Barbadian workforce, I noted that the executive director of the Barbados Employers Confederation was quoted as referring to a study done by the organization, her organization, that indicated 25% of employees polled expressed a preference to work with colleagues who were vaccinated. 25%. Now, I cannot speak to the poll that was done, the rigor with which it was done, but I wonder if the trade unions who heard it may not want to hold on to the fact that we acknowledge that a 25% of the expressed view of 25% of the workforce is given such prominence as it should determine what happens within that group. Perhaps we may want to consider that as a threshold on which issues of recognition can be resolved, or at least debated. And then there's war between the trade unions themselves, who fight each other for existential space. And there's this old issue about which some of them keep fighting. Who is the rightful representative of the Barbados workforce at the International Labour Organization? I think it is time that proper structures are put in place, that question can be settled, void of emotion, but through the application of reason. Because I do not think that a minister's opinion on the matter is adequate. Okay. Now, finally, sir, this being October, I am mindful of the significance of October to trade unionism in Barbados. Earlier this week, on October 4th, the Barbados Workers' Union acknowledged its 80th anniversary of registration as a trade union in Barbados. October seems to have some special connection to trade unions or trade unionists in Barbados. The General Secretary of the Congress of Trade Unions and Staff Associations of Barbados, Sidhu Saab, his birthday was this week. Mine is the end of this week. One Deputy General Secretary of the BWU. His is next week. Senator Franklin, pardon me? Senator Franklin is the following week. The first female President General of the Barbados Workers Union is also in that week. You know, there are things that all October-born trade unionists who love Barbados, who love social justice, would like. And fortunately, sir, it is within the ability of another October-born leader in Barbados to see that what would be a trade union wish list can become a list of deliverables in Republic Barbados. Barbados used to be hailed as an example of the way social dialogue should be practiced. That same Jean-Louis Delhomme who wrote about the limitation of Parliament, he also wrote about the way the legislature balances the power of the executive branch. He did not get into how the judiciary exerts a powerful balancing effect on the other two pillars of government. But this is a central part of the stability that we take for granted. Our courts reflect the ethos of our society. There was a recent decision handed down by the Employment Rights Tribunal, which clarified a very important point. It clarified that consultation when required, consultation when promised, consultation when ventured must not be empty. It must not be on the surface. It must not be an exercise of banalities. It must be meaningful. What noise there is, sir, outside of these walls about Barbados becoming a republic, that is not noise that is resistant of the efforts to do so. That is noise that is made in remonstrance of the process. So, notwithstanding those areas of concern that I have shared, sir, I support the object of the bill, and I wish the government and people of Barbados well in this next chapter that we are about to embark on. I'm obliged to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Senator Hunt. Senator Dr. Holder.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I promise I won't be too long this afternoon because I'm aware, sir, that we may very well have a repetition of points on this particular matter in this particular debate. For example, I listened to my colleague, Senator Springer, earlier, who gave maybe a historical perspective to his presentation. And I would wish to maybe continue in similar veins, sir, and maybe mix a little of philosophy with that to help in sharing my perspectives on this bill, which I wholeheartedly support. The acting leader of government business, sir, this morning asked two key questions, which I took note of. She said, what will we lose? And what do we fear? What will we lose? And what do we fear? And sir, I reflected on those two questions for the rest of the day, really. Because I thought that the presentation I had prepared will, in my view, aptly address, especially the second question, what do we fear? Sir, we heard throughout the day that there's nothing to lose, so that first question has been addressed. Actually, as we look at the bill before us, Section 10.1, 11, Section 12, these speak to, I believe, maybe some concerns that persons may espouse around this bill. And these points show that we are not losing. We heard it mentioned before that those judges, sir, who were appointed before will continue to serve. We heard, sir, that the Prime Minister, Minister, Parliamentary Secretary, yourself, sir, as President of the Senate, these will all continue, that our industries, sir, especially tourism. I heard someone made the point earlier about the question asked of our tourism industry. Will that continue to be a vibrant industry? Sir, we have heard that we will not lose any of these things. So then what is it that we are fearing? Sir, I reflected as I looked at this question on Paul's writings to the church at Ephesus. In what we know as chapter 6 and verse 12 of that book, Paul said to the church, after giving an exhortation on how families should be treated within that context, a cultural issue, how behaviors in relationships and so on should obtain, he said, we wrestle not. We are not fighting against flesh and blood. So, whereas America, we heard from the colleague who took a seat before, gained their independence through that particular route, pursuing freedom from the monarchy, but using the gun to help in that process. We are not fighting, sir, against flesh and blood. We are not warring against physical beings. But indeed, sir, there is a spiritual battle. There is even a psychological battle. In other words, this war that we are in, even as we debate this move to Republican status, seems to be one that is not a physical war. It's not a physical war. Sir, there are psychological issues, I believe strongly, that are affecting a number of our people and therefore informing some of the arguments, sir, that we are hearing. And I want to, for a very few minutes now, give some background to this. This is my thesis this afternoon, that there is that psychological war, that psychological battle, a battle, sir, that has been operating now for over 300 years. And why do I say that? Sir, I listened to the people on the ground. At the luncheon period, I was sharing with some colleagues. I pay close attention to the folks on the ground. I am in a number of chats, sir. I congregate with a number of interest groups. I want to know what people are saying always about national issues. Sir, in one particular chat, this issue of being a Republican, moving to Republican status, was the topic for some time. And I watched on, sir, at the comments being made. And all persons are complaining. They're complaining from the issue of time to, why now, and process, and a whole number of things. And I'm watching these comments, and I'm saying to myself, wow, underlying this conversation, sir, is fear. Then one individual in that chat, who happens to be a Trinidadian, mind you, chimed in and said, but there's really no issue. We have been a republic for years, and it hasn't changed anything in Trinidad and Tobago vis-a-vis our ability to pursue development, economic development, and the like, but it's really nothing. Actually, after November 30th, you're not even going to realize what has transpired, because there's not going to be any significant change, really. And from the time he intervened and he said that, the chatter subsided a bit. And I'm watching this conversation, and I'm saying to myself, but all this is really is fear. Sir, in another place, again, similar conversation. And people are expressing their concerns. And when you drill down and when you analyze them, they have no basis really in objective reasoning. Sir, just simply fear. And it is because of that I began with that text. That what I'm seeing really is that invisible warfare going on. And I had to really answer that question nagging in my mind, but why is this the case? And I went back, sir, to some work done by Sir Hilary Beckles and others who chronicled our development as a nation. And it is in there, sir, that I found my answer. Because despite the fact that, as one senator mentioned, there have been some revolt over time, I'm of the view that there has been a concerted effort over 300 years of this, of indoctrination and of control and of manipulation, to try to suggest to us as a people that we cannot manage our own affairs. And that despite the fact that we have gained independence in 1966, despite the fact that the father of our democracy would have fought for our right to vote, sir, there is still that battle going on psychologically relative to our ability to really manage our own affairs. That is what it is all about. Now, history would show that this process started some time ago by the Parliament of the day legislating, sir, how our black people ought to be treated. And a series of pieces of legislation over a period of time sought, as I said, to control and to manipulate our people. We have seen that as far back as 1655, we were a nation of majority black people, you know. So we were a nation of majority black people. Now this is significant because we've always had the numbers, we've always had, in my view, the majority of people to be able, sir, to govern our own affairs. But we had a minority, sir, that use the legislative power of Parliament to deny that self-governance and self-government. This is why when some months ago it was when the whole issue of, what was it called? Black Lives Matter, I think that's it, came about. I had to challenge a few colleagues of mine, say, well, but hold a minute, hold a second, but we were always majority black. I remember as well, sir, giving a comment to a reporter. Now, I've had, sir, bittersweet experiences with reporters, I must admit. But it's understandable. I've learned to understand them. They look for stories. They look for sometimes sensational issues. Some of them, not all of them. And I know that he took a part of what I said and he tried to create a little story around it. That's all right. Not a problem. But what struck me, sir, is that when it appeared in the media, social media, I think it was, if you saw the comments that were offered behind this article, you would believe that we were a majority white country. My simple thesis is this: we have to stop jumping at everything the folks in the North say and do and manage our own affairs. Sir, why is it that in 2021, I believe, or maybe 2020, I think it might have been last year, I can't recall, we are going to jump on a bandwagon because it is popular in North America? A country, sir, that has about 13% of its citizens that are black. Sir, we are 95%. So why is it that that particular ideology is going to rule our day when we were always in the majority? And that was simply my point. It takes me back, sir, to, and I digress a minute with your permission, that for a while we knew that coconut oil was good for you, is good for your hair and all that. And we allowed the folks in the North to tell us, based on some research, oh, you should not use coconut oil. We dumped coconut oil. Sir, we always knew that cannabis had medicinal properties. The folks in the North said, this is illegal. They went and they destroyed all the plants in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. There was very little response from CARICOM. All of a sudden now, because they have decided to add this as an industry, we are now on the bandwagon. Cannabis is now good for you again. So this is the challenge that I have, And I can go on and on with other examples. Right? We do not need these foreign entities to determine, in my view, what is right or what is wrong for us as a sovereign state. That is the point. And when we look at our history for over 5 decades, our parliament, sir, our parliament carries this particular pigmentation. So we are the ones that have been in charge and in control of the laws that we pass, of the legislative framework and the legislative agenda that we set. Sir, we have been in charge of that. So that means that we can easily use this facility here called Parliament to determine the kind of country, the kind of civilization, the kind of society that we want to have. Now, sir, some time ago I spoke to the role of Parliament, given my perspective, but there's been some research done as well. In 2018, the Commonwealth published a paper that spoke to the role of national parliaments. And, sir, it identified at least 3 key points. That it is there to legislate, it is there to give oversight of the executive, and it is there to represent the people. So to legislate, to oversee what happens vis-a-vis the executive, and to represent the people. Sir, that is our role. That is our role. So us coming here today with this particular bill, sir, is going to assist us, in my view, in setting the agenda for the next 55 years even, and beyond. And to correct, sir, what has transpired for hundreds of years, and hopefully help us in this journey of adjusting our perspectives and transforming our mindset and our outlook to one that allows us to govern ourselves. So, sir, I began by asking the question as the leader of government business asked today, what do we fear? What do we fear? And I shared, sir, that from 1655 we were majority black. We were in the majority, sir. 1655. But look at how that minority set about to instill fear in us. Look at it, sir. In 1661, I said aided with research that I pulled from Sir Hilary Beckles. In 1661, sir, the first slave laws became the template for other countries, sir. As we know, Barbados was the first black slave society in the world. In the world, sir. And so this template was used for other colonies, Jamaica and South Carolina, Virginia, and the like. Sir, in 1668, our people, they're growing now, they're in the majority. They were classified in law as real estate, sir. As real estate. They were attached to properties, yes, and therefore could be bought and sold with the said properties, yet they were in the majority. So you understand why Senator Springer helped us to understand the revolts that happened, especially in the 18th century. But I go further, sir, to show that Barbados was the last British colony to pass the Emancipation Act. The last. England, I assume, and several historians as well, would have come to the position where, they accepted that they're now wealthy, they've reaped so much, millions and millions from these colonies, they're now going to allow and encourage emancipation even. But here's Barbados, sir. Barbados, so indoctrinated by that time, so indoctrinated, sir, was the last British colony to pass this Emancipation Act. Matter of fact, it is said, most historians believe, that it was Britain who put the pressure on our assembly here to pass the act. The folks here didn't want to do it because they felt that we had a good thing going. We had a good model going. Why should we emancipate our people? But sir, as I looked at the history, so you know what hurt me the most and helped me to understand this concept of fear is that as most of these colonies were experiencing emancipation, the former slaves now are happy, they're free. Those from Guyana leaving the plantation in droves, those from Jamaica, sir, leaving the plantation, St. Lucia leaving the plantation, sir. The Barbadians elected to stay on the plantation. Now, there's a school of thought that you can't be vexed with our forefathers because there was no land, sir. There was no land for them to run to. As you know, in Jamaica and others, you had hills that you can run to and start a life. There was no place, sir, for them to go to. And it was so orchestrated to the point where that great famine that occurred in the early 1900s, when they sent, sir, the reporters, the investigators, rather, here to analyze, who indicated that why they're seeing such grave famine in Barbados at the time was because of landlessness and a lack of economic participation in the country. Sir, when you look at this history, sometimes it brings tears to my eyes. Because Emancipation Act is passed, other colonies, people are fleeing from the plantations, but Barbadians are returning because they had nowhere else to go. The system was so designed to keep, sir, the control of economic power in the hands of a few. That even though we were in the majority, because at emancipation, sir, 98% of our people, our African people, were born here. 2%, the data suggests, came from Africa, compared to 30% in Jamaica. So the majority of our people, our black people, were born right here in Barbados. But they had nowhere to run, sir. And all the laws coming down through time, the Parliament of Barbados, sir, 382 years, we boast, the third oldest in the Commonwealth, passed law after law after law to keep our people suppressed and manipulated and controlled. Lack of economic development. Sir, this is why, personally speaking, this is Lynette Holder's opinion, not the government, clearly. I do not believe we should be applying a tax to land. Sir, I don't believe it. If I had my way, sir, this is Lynette Holder's view. If I had my way, Barbadians would not pay a cent in tax on land. Not when you look at the history. When you look at the history, sir, and understand how the white planter class in this country influenced law after law after law to prevent the blacks in Barbados from owning land. Now, I would charge, sir, for commercial use, but not residential use. Not residential use. Not residential use, sir. Our black people deserve better. We deserve better. So, sir, this is a part of the history. And so why I make that point is, when you do the research and you see all the pieces of legislation that prevented our people from owning land. Sir, there was a period of time when the Barbadians, yes, flocked to Panama. We know about 45,000 or thereabout flocked to Panama looking for a better way of life for their family. So when they came back, sir, with money. One researcher suggests that during that period of between 1906 and 1916, sir, those returning from Panama had thousands of dollars, but they had nothing to buy. Why? Because the laws were passed that you couldn't buy land. And then when the pressure, sir, when the pressure came upon the whites at the time, the planter class at the time, sir, you know, they went to Parliament and passed laws to sell the blacks the rab land on the plantations. Because they said, okay, well, we own it all. You coming back and you have some money. Let me see how we can have a win-win. How we can get your money from you and seemingly give you what you're asking for. So the rab land on the plantation, sir, was set aside for our people to purchase. Sir, you see why I feel how I feel about land. But this is our history. So when we hear today people objecting to us becoming a republic, people objecting to us completing this process, sir, in our independence, you understand that it is because of years and years and years of us feeling, of being encouraged even, indoctrinated even to feel that we could not take care of our own affairs. Sir, this is my perspective on why we have this fear. But we're here today to correct this, to continue this process, sir. This process of correcting the wrongs that have been done, that have been allowed, sir, to obtain for centuries even. So I support this. I think, sir, that over time the noise will die down. I remember then when there was a noise around the ABC highway. How many of us recall that? There was a noise around the flyovers. And every morning, I'm sure as we travel to work, we would love to have had those flyovers because of the stress it is, sir, to get into town or to get from the south to the north. Sir, the noise, in my view, will dissipate. But never let us, as Parliament, sir, forget our responsibility. Never let us, as Parliament, forget this is why we are here. And so, as I conclude my submission, I want us to appreciate that there's even more to be done. There's a lot more to be done. We have the vending bill, sir, being reviewed again, removing the colonial trappings, sir. But I want for us to go further. I want for us to go further. Recently in the press, sir, a credit union leader made the point that our credit union laws are archaic and need to change. But you know why that is the case, sir? In 1905, the Friendly Society Act was passed. Sir, you know that this act prevented societies back then from buying or holding more than 1 acre of land. And as I said, they were able to buy the RAB land. The Friendly Societies Act of 1905, sir, sometimes reminds me of our legislation, the Corporate Societies Act today. Because just as how that piece of legislation back then sought to disenfranchise, if you will, citizens from owning land, today's Cooperative Societies Act, sir, in my view, does not reflect a 21st century credit union movement and where we ought to be focusing now on a sector that is close to $3 billion in assets under management, sir. But I go further to suggest that we also have to use this Parliament, as we're doing with this bill, to address the issue of e-commerce, sir, to help facilitate those in the micro, small, and medium enterprise sector to be able to trade online, to be able to trade in this global space, sir. I believe I'll have the opportunity, sir, to speak to these issues a little further. But one last point I'll mention there, campaign financing, sir. We need to use the power of Parliament to address this issue, because we can no longer continue, just as we saw coming through the 17th century, the 18th century, where a small percentage, sir, of merchants felt that they had the power to control the masses. Sir, in this 21st century, Barbados, we have to guard ourselves against a small percentage, again, of capitalists thinking that they're, because of their wealth, can control political parties, sir. I believe the time has come for us to use the power of Parliament to bring campaign financing reform to this country so that those capitalists, when one party is in power, they're there. Another party is in power, they're there. So that has, in my view, to be corrected by Parliament. That has to be corrected by Parliament. Sir, my final thought, I won't go too far into that. I see the Deputy President is looking at me. So I won't go too far into that. Sir, my final thought is this. I believe strongly in democratic socialism, sir. This was ingrained in me somewhat. When I was a child, my father, sir, was born in 1908. Yes, I am a daddy's girl. And sir, I sat with him growing up and listened to the stories about Grantley Adams. Sir, had no thought about political parties, voting, nothing so. But I listened to the stories. Now, he had land, so he had the opportunity to vote. But I listened to the stories, sir, and I heard him speak about this Moses and what he did for ordinary Barbadians, black Barbadians in particular, through legislation, through the development of the trade union, all in an effort to enfranchise our people. And so from then I believe that those conversations, listening to him, I'm a child, 9, 10, 11, listening to these stories. Sir, they help with my ethos. They help with my ideology. And may very well have been the reason why, sir, I gravitated to such institutions as the credit union, the church, not the religious aspect of it. Small business, sir. Because I believe in the principle, to whom much is given, much is required. And so we have to try to create equity as much as we can. We have to use the power of Parliament to do that, just as he did, sir. Sir Grantley Herbert Adams, the Moses of his day. We must do today. And so with those words, Mr. President, I support this bill. I believe this is the step in the right direction. This is going to help us, sir, who I believe address this psychological issue that has crippled the development of so many of our people and institutions for too long. And finally put a nail in that proverbial coffin. Sir, I'm obliged.
Thank you very much, Senator Dr. Holder. Senator Wiggins.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, for the opportunity to speak to this Constitution Amendment Bill, where we are completing the process of independence by the revocation of the Independence Order Act as we move towards a Republican status. As was said 100 times before today, it was an act of the British Parliament, the House of Commons, that gave us this Constitution. Mr. President, sir, Barbados achieved adult suffrage in 1951, and I believe that Her Majesty the Queen ascended to the throne in 1952. So in a sense, I would say that Her Majesty the Queen was with this current monarch, was with Barbados all the way. But I do believe that the time has come now for us to complete this journey of independence. I remember her journeying to Barbados somewhere in the 1974, 75 to night cigar field sobers. And I remember in the days when we were all school children and the monarch came to Barbados, we had to be at the side of the road with our flags and shaking at the Queen as she passed by. And many people used to complain then, you know, why would we have to do, you know, do this thing with somebody, you know, coming in from England, and you have to be there lining the street to shake at the person, and you even heard that it was an artificial arm that was going that way, that it was in fact not her real arm. So, so Mr. President, this is a very, very important step in the process. And many of you would know when diplomats and ambassadors are being appointed to the various Canada, England, United States, all across the world, the government of Barbados has to seek permission from Her Majesty the Queen in order to appoint envoys to these various jurisdictions. And I believe the time has come when we will now be the state of Barbados, where we would be responsible for issues like that, and we would no longer have to seek permission from the palace in order to be able to appoint an envoy. I remember sometime too as well, the former Prime Minister Owen Arthur had introduced a local honor, I believe it was the Knight of St. Andrew. And I believe, K.A., I believe, Mr. President, that was supposed to have been a Barbados honor, the Knight of St. Andrew. And hence, that was one of the reasons that Independence Day was on the 30th of November, because the 30th of November is Independence Day. And I spoke about that too, sir, because people are asking, well, so no, there would no longer be the knighthood, whether male or female, to persons. But I don't know in the process going forward if the Knight of St. Andrew, which was a Barbados honor, if that would be used going forward. I know the Most Honorable has been introduced as one of the recognitions for persons who are being honored, especially independents. Also, Mr. President, we know that ministers, judges, senators, members of parliament will no longer have to swear allegiance to Her Majesty the Queen, her heirs and successors. And that was another thing that people were offended about, especially when you have to swear not only to the current generation, but to future generations of the monarchy. So those things will now be history, but we have to recognize that we would not be breaking with Britain, because Barbados, as pointed out by Senator McConney, is still a member of the 54-member Commonwealth. And I think that this is one of the things that we have to outline a whole lot to Barbados and to educate them about it, because they think that becoming a republic, you're no longer a member of the Commonwealth. But we're here to tell Barbadians today that we remain a member, a proud member of the Commonwealth of Nations. One of the other things that I looked at in this Constitution Amendment Bill, sir, is the renaming of places in Barbados. We would have started to rename places in Barbados along the way, even before we were consciously thinking about moving to the whole concept of Republican status. I remember, as a St. George person, Sweet Bottom in St. George, that is now called Sweet Vale. So we would have changed some names, and then there's Penny Hole, that's now Gemsway. Spring Garden Highway recently has been renamed the Mighty Griner Highway. And these are all things that we have done consciously or unconsciously without even thinking about Republican status. And there are many schools, many educational institutions. We have the Dighton Griffith School, the Luther Thorne School, Darrell Jordan, Blackman Gollop, that have already been renamed. And I'm even thinking now about a school like Princess Margaret School. What would we rename a school like Princess Margaret School? Should we rename that after one of our illustrious sons or daughters of the soil, like our present Governor General, Sandra Mason? You can call it the Sandra Mason School. So I think that as we look to rename our various institutions, and let me move to the St. Michael's School. And I would say this to you, Mr. President. We had Anne, Boadicea, Victoria, and Elizabeth. And I can tell you, for years, when I used to be a member of our Old Scholars Association, and this is many years ago, long before this young girl here, I was saying that it's about time that we rename those houses at St. Michael's School. I would say after, like, past headmistresses, like Dame Patricia Simmons, she was our headmistress, even though she went to Queen's College. Miss Constance Innes, Dame Maisie Barker Welch, Ada Strawn, Elsie Burrows, Madre Husbands, these outstanding women that went to St. Michael's School. So I was saying, this is a process that I believe should have happened a long time ago. And I know people are saying, well, so what about all those roads in Bank Hall, Buckingham Road, Windsor Road, Prince of Wales Road? Mr. President, those will have to be issues that will have to be determined either by the residents in speaking to their representatives, what they want in terms of the charter, the Charter of Barbados that I'm sure the goodly senator here will speak to, in terms of if there are things that we have now that we want to keep, or if there are things that we have that we want to discard. So all these things would naturally be incorporated in that charter. And Mr. President, I'm sure this other example that I'm going to say could be quite controversial. What then would we rename the Queen Elizabeth Hospital? You know, and I was thinking that maybe we should rename that hospital. There's the Banford Polyclinic already. You can't be greedy. You know, so Mr. President, what I'm saying is that maybe we can rename the Queen Elizabeth Hospital from a previous Governor General, Nita Barrow. Dame Nita Barrow was a nurse, and she was an outstanding citizen of the world. So if we are thinking about going Republican status, don't do it piecemeal, go the whole way. And important institutions, like I said, like the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, that would definitely have to be renamed. And that's my view. And Mr. President, we know in this amendment bill that the roles of the Prime Minister, the ministers, the President of the Senate, and all would remain the same. Similarly, the role of the Governor General, who will now be a president. So we then ask ourselves, what then is the role of the President or the current Governor General? I think a lot of times people do not really know the role of the present Governor General. And her role is constitutional, it's legislative, it's ceremonial, social, and administrative. And most people tend to focus, Mr. President, primarily on the social aspect of her functions. But, I mean, many of you would know when we were debating that Public Service Act 2020, persons had to appeal to Her Excellency, the Governor General, to hit all those prejudice applications as a result of that act that was passed in here, Mr. President. And she had to go through each and every one of those applications. I think there were over 700 applications single-handedly. So a lot of her functions are administrative. I'm sure lots of people who work in offices, they don't work in the full glare of cameras. So they only see the Governor General and soon to be our first president. They don't see the roles behind the scenes. And this is why, in terms of the public education, Senator Rogers, these things have to be brought out to the public. The education of people, as someone said earlier, not only of the Constitution, but even what the role of the President of the Senate is. What is the role of the Speaker? What is the role of the Speaker of the House of Assembly? Years ago, Mr. Justice Leroy Innes, he used to teach a subject called civics. And you want to hear something? I don't know what you would call it today, but civics, it would be one of the things in terms of educating the public of Barbados about the Constitution of Barbados. We don't have to go back to the 1600s and the 1700s, which is important. But if you do a whole question on civics, I saw somebody, and this is not necessarily civics, I saw somebody said earlier on social media that someone was on the air and they didn't know the difference between HIV and COVID. And the thing about it is that if people are not educated to know what you as the President of the Senate, if they don't know what you do, people can come on air and say things that are incorrect, and people would fly off the hook and say things that are not necessarily true. So one of the things that I would like to say as part of the public educational process is the critical institutions in this country that the population of Barbados should be educated about them, Mr. President. And I want to say wholeheartedly that Barbados moving to a Republican status is going to make our young people feel like they're really part of a new movement going forward, because now in the middle of COVID, even me sometimes feel depressed. And we want to be plugged into something that is going to make us feel a bit happier about what is going on. So I would think that if our staff committee, if they engage a lot of young people, then we can go back outside or have a lot of them coming in via Zoom and ask them, what do you want to see as Barbados move to a Republican status? I think you will get a lot of comment from them as to exactly how they feel and what they want to do. Sir, Mr. President, with those very few words, I am obliged to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Wiggins. Senator Drakes.
Thank you, Mr. President. And in an attempt to adhere to the protocols given the situation that we find ourselves in, I'm going to attempt to speak with my mask on today. I hope that it is not too distracting as the last time I tried to do that, but nonetheless.
And hear you crystal clear.
I am so thankful for that compliment, sir. Sir, forgive me if I am going to start the presentation that I want to make, reflecting on a few things that were said before I got to my feet. Because I knew that the debate was going to be wide-ranging, still anchored in a discussion about national identity and so on. But it is interesting how we kind of reflect on these things from different perspectives. And I say that because I want to first say to the notion of fear, because I unfortunately was not here when the debate started, and I didn't hear that question being posed by the acting leader of government business today. And I say this before I start, maybe it is not necessarily a question of fear, because I too have my concerns, but they're not based on fear. I think the more appropriate word would be trust, or lack thereof, Mr. President. Trust, Mr. President. But, sir, this bill, this Constitution Amendment Bill 2021, is rooted in a lot of things. We have had discussions about nation building, leadership, but one thing that I want to emphasize and state clearly, for me, I find when we have this discussion about Barbados becoming a parliamentary republic, I believe it is about the will of the people. It has to be about that. Nothing more, nothing less. It has to be about the will of the people. Because even in some of the previous contributions, sir, we heard that nation building usually comes about through a group of people who have suffered, who have gone to war, who have fought, Mr. President, and in some instances persecuted. And they've overcome those challenges. And in overcoming those challenges, they become unified. They then have this sense of identity that only having gone through that experience together, then they determine who they are collectively and how they want to be governed. And I think we can safely say that a lot of countries who have gone through war, there's a different sense of nationalism because they know what it is to sacrifice flesh and blood for the intangible things that they seek to becoming citizens of a country, Mr. President. So, sir, I say that to then say that the process for me by which we are moving towards Barbados becoming a republic, personally, I believe it is flawed. Because it is also then not about what do we have to lose, but what is it that we are trying to accomplish? What is it that we want to gain from this process? One would think we would want a newly found sense of national consciousness, national identity, patriotism. And if, Mr. President, those things are not manifesting themselves from the natural progression for the need for us to be liberated, because by all intents and purposes, we are a sovereign country. It is not coming from any proclamation of atonement of sins committed to the descendants of those of us whose ancestors were brought here in bondage and as property. But, Mr. President, this transition is coming about through what I deem to be a political directive, with many Barbadians still not even understanding what a republic is in the context of governance, and then what does that mean for Barbados. And unfortunately, Mr. President, it is also being met with apathy, because so many of our brothers and sisters at this moment in time are preoccupied with survival. Sir, my question then to the government of Barbados is, on whose behalf if the consultation is clearly coming after the fact, on whose behalf then is the time, the energy, and the resources being expended at this moment, at this time, sir, to transition Barbados to become a republic? Who are you representing? Is it the will of the people? And Mr. President, I stand here and I do not want it to be said that I do not support Barbados becoming a republic. I, like my colleague, Senator Franklin, wholeheartedly believe that this is the right step for Barbados. But I have a problem with the process. Because fundamentally, the process, when done correctly, will result in the things that we want out of becoming a republic. Sir, in an environment where we are challenged on every front, there are some persons in Barbados who make up the Barbadian society who see it as the government being almost flippant to march steadfast in this direction. And if that is the case, and our concerns will be handled after the fact, then how are we to buy into the process? How are we to express our national identity? How are we supposed to express our national consciousness? Sir, there's a statement made in the book called The Art of War. Many persons, I'm sure, would have read this book by Sun Tzu. It says, treat your men as you would your own beloved sons, and they will follow you into the deepest valley. Sir, dare I say that we are already in the deepest valley. Many Barbadians, Mr. President, are fighting for mere survival. And to ask them now, in this moment, to follow you on another path, by which it seems as though it is an instruction and not necessarily by democratic inclusion, why should they follow? Mr. President, how can we say then that this is in our best interest, it is for the country, when, for the most part, as I said earlier, the average Barbadian, and when I say average, I mean those who are not plugged into the political process and governance system, which may be many of them, but there's a large majority as well that don't follow politics as closely as others do. They're really unaware of what we're here doing today. They literally have no clue. Sir, how is it for the country then if even those who understand it do not see it as a priority at this time, in this moment? How is it then for the country when the substantive dialogue and engagement around constitutional reform comes after this transition to a Barbadian head of state that we are seeking to pass here today? So, sir, there is no fear within me. I am just uncomfortable. That I will state. But what has to happen, Mr. President, is an admission that there clearly is something wrong with the process. Because what the process does, when we open up for dialogue from St. Lucie to Christchurch, St. James to St. John, across this country, opening up that dialogue about Barbados becoming a republic allows then the education process to be triggered. It allows people to be engaged. It allows people to have ownership So that it is then not a government telling Barbadians, this is what we're doing by this date, and this is how you should possibly feel after. The process naturally would allow that to happen. The tensions that exist in our society would come to the fore, and hopefully, some compromises will be made, understanding that we live on this island and as citizens have to put Barbados first. And then from that process, there's a level of tolerance, there's a level of dignity that comes out, Mr. President. And overall then, a state of collectivism, a newfound state of community, because we've done the hard work. We've looked at all of the things that no longer serve us, and we've said, put those aside, and this is how we want to move forward. Because, sir, I did my own small questions. I play a small, talk to some people, groups, and so on. And what struck me is the amount of Barbadians who said they wanted to vote directly for the President of Barbados. But, sir, that cannot come out from the way in which we're doing this now. Because the legislation clearly states that rather than persons directly voting for a president, the parliamentary group, an electoral college based on before a commission. But does the Barbadian in 2021 have the same sentiments that are found in this document? Based on what I have heard, particularly as it relates to how involved persons want to be in the nomination or the election of a president, it seems Barbadians want to be directly involved. And that is from the small caucus that I spoke to. Sir, and what makes it even more troublesome is that this transition was proclaimed and announced by none other than Her Excellency herself in a throne speech on the 15th of September last year. So then there could be an argument that there was ample time to have the national dialogue. There could have been a strategy in place whereby Barbadians had, for the last 12 months, engaged on this topic. And by setting certain benchmarks, we would have identified what it is we want to have, let's say, by a 6 months period. What are some of the key things we want to know from Barbadians in that 6 month period? And then after that, we would have somehow finalized some kind of draft. That by today, when we come in here, we don't have to be iffing and guessing and trying to sway an argument, but we would know. We would have some sense of what is the pulse on the ground. What do people want? What is the will of the people? Mr. President, the other thing that I want to mention here is, and it is unfortunate that this discussion around what we are calling the evolution of independence, that this debate was also marred by Barbadians having to understand or struggle with the concept of the first president of Barbados being installed on November 30th. And I think that was really an unfortunate situation, because if it is a case that we are saying we're moving in a new direction, we're building on the foundation, no problem, that is fine. But when I walk around and I'm being told things like, you know, having that ceremony on Independence Day, Mr. President, is offensive and disrespectful. That is what some Barbadians feel. And how is that captured then if we have already placed a self-imposed deadline on this transition? Do those persons not get a say? Are they not to be heard? Are their feelings no longer relevant? But yet we are saying this is the evolution of our democracy. And if government is open to listening, how about the suggestions of Republic Day being commemorated? The first suggestion, the 14th of May. The 14th of May in 1625 was when the first English ship arrived in Barbados. We can tie the emergence, or the settlement rather, of the English and breaking the indoctrination of colonialism. By celebrating Republic Day, we, the people of Barbados, recognize ourselves as a sovereign state being led by a head of state on the 14th of May. Or, the second suggestion, the 26th of June. The 26th of June. The 26th of June, 1639. I have made sure that that fact is fact-checked, as they now say by those who are able to do so in this honorable chamber, was when the Barbados Parliament was established. So if the Parliament was used, as Senator Holder said, to disenfranchise and oppress our people, why not then, as free men, as a sovereign nation, use the 26th of June, 2022, to mark a new path in our history's page, Mr. President? But all of that would come out of the process. So people will say, well, it doesn't really matter when the process happens. We got to do something. Because far too long we've been diddly-daddlying with this issue. So just do it and the rest will come out in the wash. No, Mr. President. I don't subscribe to that. I don't subscribe to that notion. Because essentially, in doing it disjointed as we've, I believe, come to accept, the process is untidy. It is untidy. And in doing it this way, this course of action, Mr. President, without the hearts, without the minds and souls of Barbadians, and then being vested in the process, what is going to happen is, I believe, it's going to be anticlimactic. There's going to be an anticlimactic atmosphere around this. And one of the things that we cannot force is national pride. You cannot force someone into believing in their country. You cannot force someone into being proud of their country, Mr. President. So instead of us having gone through the national dialogue and then having a nationwide celebration and various gestures of patriotism, a select few, I believe, Mr. President, will be the ones who will get to enjoy this moment. And that is unfortunate and frankly sad, because in a way you've watered down what could have been a monumentous and pivotal occasion for Barbados. And so those persons who find themselves disconnected to this process at this time, I really cannot blame them. Because there's also the argument that this is really not about any real change. It is going back to the references of war. It's as though you're claiming victory while still fighting.
Mission accomplished, said George Bush.
Because there are persons who believe that there are other pressing issues that people want the government of Barbados to address. They want them to focus on things that directly affect them. Sir, if we had the same conviction about this transition and we applied it to the financial viability and transparency of the national insurance scheme, a lot of people in Barbados would be happy. A lot of people would be happy, Mr. President. Sir, something as fundamental to our social security, the national insurance scheme, is still to this day in a state of languish as it relates to its financial and auditing reporting. And that is on the backdrop, sir, of having gone through a debt restructuring exercise and the scheme losing $1.3 billion. Then last year it was hit with unprecedented levels of unemployment claims, basically rendering the unemployment fund empty. And then, Mr. President, on top of that, to recapitalize it, and I am not aware of the details of this deal, to recapitalize it, I believe it's over a 3-year period, I stand corrected. We use borrowed funds from the International Monetary Fund to recapitalize it, to the tune of $180 million. So, sir, forgive me if I am not carrying the same spirited exuberance as my colleagues on the other side. Because, sir, for me, I believe it is a dereliction of duty to move towards the last step of what we are saying is sovereignty. Well, the basics, some of the basics in our society are not being met. And clearly there is an issue with managing our own affairs. And, sir, dare I say it's almost farcical to transition where we have a culture around public funds where the general mismanagement is accepted. So there are a lot of things that we can prioritize. There are a lot of things that we can set deadlines for. The reduction of youth unemployment could be one. How are we managing our national debt? Could be another one. How are we going to deal with the inflation that is coming down the pipeline from outside? Where's the deadline for making sure that the public sector is fit for purpose for the 21st century? Sir, where is the deadline to remove all of the illegal guns from our communities? Those are things that, for me, need deadlines. With the same swiftness as we transition to becoming a republic, with the same vigor of Barbados becoming a republic, because those things are what make up the fabric of our society in a very material way, Mr. President. And then, Mr. President, there are things, yes, the government needs to prioritize, and then you have to ask what is going on with Barbadians? Where are their minds at? How do they feel? Sir, you're giving me time? No, sir. Right now, many persons are fighting to feed their families. They're fighting to keep a roof over their heads. They're fighting to keep themselves and their family out of poverty. They're fighting to keep themselves safe during this pandemic, Mr. President. And based on what has happened in the last 9 to 10 months in Barbados, I would say many of us are fighting to keep our sanity. And I do not know, Mr. President, if Barbadians have the fight in them to take up another fight, unnecessarily so. I think they want to tackle the fights that they already have.
Fight for the Commissioner of Police.
Sir, the other elephant in the room that hasn't been addressed is the cost. I've yet to hear how much this is costing the said taxpayers that we're going to consult after. How much of their money that we're going to take up, or not me, I don't have responsibility for that, the government of Barbados. How much of taxpayers' money is being assigned to this transition? No one has said what that price tag is. But we can take up their money first and then consult them after. That's what we're saying. That's what this situation is reflecting. Mr. President, I've been told from a very young child, when you start wrong, it's usually end wrong. And that's all I will say to that.
Please line up.
Okay, Mr. President. Sir, I just want to say that when it comes to sovereignty and governance, I am hoping that this is not going to be a lip service exercise, because it was mentioned in a previous contribution that we do not want the dictates of outside influencing how we see ourselves and how we manage our affairs. But sir, there are a number of other things that I want to say, but I'll say this. How are we a sovereign nation with pride and national identity and consciousness, but we have foreign jurisdictions adjudicating on corruption with our very own laws, but yet we say we are politically mature, Mr. President, to make this step? I have a fundamental problem with that, Mr. President. Because that means we do not have the political maturity, we do not have the ethics, Mr. President, and we do not have the moral standing.
And you do not have the time. Please find it.
Sir, that was my last point.
Thank you.
And I want Barbadians to hear me when I say this. It cannot be that we're moving towards the last step in the evolution of independence, but yet we shy away from things like corruption within the political class, within the public sector, because that, Mr. President, has a direct relationship to the funds and the resources that are available to the vulnerable in this community. And like a leech, Mr. President, when monies are misappropriated within the public sector, it can't get to the people outside that need it. And Barbadians have to ask themselves if this process is their will. Mr. President, I'm obliged to you.
Thank you very much, Senator Drakes. Senator Nurse.
Thank you, Mr. President. It is my pleasure and joy to be able to stand in this honorable Senate today and be part of this debate, which is setting the legislative machinery for my country, Barbados, to become a fully sovereign country. And by so doing, severing its remaining colonial ties to the British monarchy by replacing Queen Elizabeth II as our head of state. But yet, as it seems to me, we shall still have some lingering ties to the British monarchy, because I heard the acting leader of government business, Senator McConney, refer to the fact that we shall still remain a member of the Commonwealth. And as we know, we will now be set to become the 34th member of that would be a republic in the Commonwealth. And of course, I say that to make the point that the Queen is the head of the Commonwealth. So there will still be that little lingering link, while not in any way dictating or having any control now over what we do in Barbados. Mr. President, I've listened to all of the contributions, and I think I can say without exception, all who have spoken have been in agreement with this country becoming a republic. There has obviously been disagreement about the process. Some legal issues may have been raised. To my mind, it's more like, substance over form, because at the end of the day, I think what I understand and what I hear coming through very clearly is that we all want to see Barbados move towards Republican status. Mr. President, the discussion about a Barbadian head of state has been going on as long as, I believe, since independence. Questions were raised as to whether at that time, back in 1966, whether or not we should not have then moved directly on to a republic. Of course, I think there was some feeling then that having the Queen continue to be head of state would allure a lot of the fears, and they put fear in inverted commas, of some of our Barbadian citizens who may have then felt that we would have been moving to, when we went to that state of independence, we would have been moving to a state of anarchy, and that we were not yet mature enough to be able to control our own destiny. And that having the monarch remain as head, I think, demonstrated and gave some comfort to those who had doubts that there was still this invisible coming hand that could control and to take action if necessary to keep this country in a steady and in a steady state. And so I have no difficulty in supporting the legislation. As I said, I believe we all are on board with it, and therefore I look forward to being able to be part of seeing and having this history made come November the 30th. There are issues, and Senator Franklin raised some issues, for example, timing. We could always argue, is this the correct time? We have some serious issues. We have some serious economic issues to which we have to grapple. The COVID-19 disaster has overtaken almost everything. And the question has been raised, therefore, in this context, is this the correct time? We know that September, for example, I saw screaming in the Nation newspaper about 2 days ago. It was the deadliest September, I believe the headline read. And, you know, we used to remember September. We used to have a saying, September remember. But that was really in relation to hurricanes and weather disasters. But now this year, there's this change. We're really going forward now. We will probably be remembering September, not for those disasters, but for these health disasters related to COVID. I suppose you could also raise the issue of timing in relation to should Independence and Republic Day be celebrated on the same day. And these are all issues that are worthy of discussion. And I would say that we can discuss it all we wish to, but at the end of the day, there's probably no right time. Somebody has to make the decision. And if it is the decision of this administration that the time is right, then so be it. It does not take away, in my view, or not significantly, in my view, from the fact that we all want to move forward, to be a republic, and to have a Barbadian head of state. And I think that some of the issues that I have, of course, would relate to discussion which, if you were to have had them before the whole, before November the 30th, the population would have been able to discuss and to be able to opine on the type of Republican state they wish to have. Would they wish to have a state like the French or the Americans, or a simple, or the type of republic like we have in Trinidad or Guyana, and so these would be genuine discussions on which I think the population would have been useful to hear the views of the general public on such issues. But alas, I think, and I don't know if part of the intention of government was to go that route, was to have that discussion ahead of November the 30th. But alas, we have been overtaken by the COVID scenario, which has preempted government from doing a lot of the things presumably that they may have wished to do before we moved ahead with implementing the Republican state. Some of the good things which I think and which I'm happy to see that the legislation captures is the concept of a consensus between all of the different political parties which in the House, who shall now be responsible by way of an electoral college to elect the president. Because the question of a 2/3 majority, I think, is a very good one. It therefore gives a sense of that election being non-political, or I suppose, as they would say, non-partisan, which is the term they tend to use in the U.S. But we have a non-partisan president. I particularly like, too, the idea of a cooling off period from those persons who were in politics, from being restricted from the position of holding that position for a period of time. My concern, of course, Mr. President, is that I think 12 months is probably a short period. I would have suggested more like a cooling off period of 3 years, perhaps even for at least one session of Parliament, which would normally be for a 5-year period, before one would be allowed to take up that position. Mr. President, the other thing that I would have all wished to see as well is that it would have been mandatory, because it's not written in the legislation. I believe that any sensible president would do it, but that it should be mandatory for anyone who becomes that a president. You could not be allowed to be a president and still have ties with any political party. So there should be not only a cooling off period, as we said earlier, but there should be a total severing of any ties to any political party. And there may not be, some may not see them as big issues, But overall, it creates the environment, I think, in which at the end of the day we can say that we have a president who we can look to with confidence as being non-political, non-partisan, and really a president of all of the people of Barbados. Mr. President, I think that a president must represent, our president or our head of state must represent and reflect our national identity, our culture, and our heritage. And I think that we definitely would not get that if our monarch were to still be, if our head of state were still to be the British monarch. And I take this opportunity because it has been announced by the Prime Minister in congratulating that individual who shall, it seems to me,